Now, my great pleasure to introduce a lifelong friend, Professor B.M. Arora. We have worked together for long, and even after leaving respectively to different destinations from TIFR, we have continued to meet, collaborate, and teach together, and it has been a great pleasure. Professor Arora joined Solid State Electronics Group as a visiting fellow in 1972, and then retired as a professor from Department of Condensed Matter Physics and Material Science in 2008. He and his students worked on growth of gallium arsenide and related materials by liquid phase epitaxy and of quantum structures by metal organic vapor phase epitaxy. His students have worked on spectroscopy of quantum structures. He also applied quantum structures to develop optoelectronic devices like diode lasers and photodetectors. This is the bio that he has probably supplied, and in his eternal modesty, he has not included the very important fact that he owns the original patent on plasma display devices. You hear about plasma displays and so on all over the place, and I had the pleasure of seeing pictures of his early work on plasma display devices, and I was so pleased to learn that he, in fact, owns the original patent on this very important class of displays. Professor Arora.
Okay, thanks, Dinesh. That plasma display work was a long time back. So I'm here to tell you about semiconductors work at TIFR, and this presentation will cover up to the year 2000 or something, approximately that. As Dinesh said, I joined in 1972, and so the group was started, as I will show, in 65, and then I will trace the history along as it went along. In this thing which I have put up, I have been helped by many people who were working in something called Solid State Electronics Group, which doesn't exist now. It was merged into a Department of Condensed Matter Physics and Material Science, which came up when Professor Jha instituted that framework. Dr. Zarabi is not part of TIFR, he was never part, but he did spend some time. You will see when everybody knows there is something called the only semiconductor industry which worked on integrated circuits with semiconductor complex, and so he was a managing director for several years, and he was in fact involved right from the beginning. And I should add, thanks to TIFR archives and photography section, and also library. I forgot to mention this here in the pictures which you will see. Okay, so then when did and how did this work, which later on became some sort of thing which applied work, that is how the TIFR is an Institute of Fundamental Research, and then how come it had this inclination to work in this area? Well, it was not the only work which was applied. There are microwaves, you have already heard about it in Pilay's presentation. So Solid State Electronics Group. So the first Indian-made digital computer this is the motivation. This is from the source book, 25 years, was designed and built in the institute in early 60s. This computer used thermionic valves. Many of you may not have seen them. And it was soon realized that the future generation of computers and computer-based technology could be advanced only by resorting to solid-state devices. And so rationale for working on semiconductors, which were the materials for making solid-state electronics devices. And this gentleman is D.Y. Phadke. I don't know if many people may have seen him. I owe my own induction in TIFR most probably due to Professor Phadke. thin film and semiconductor electronics were supposed to be the areas in which this solid state electronics group will work. K.V. Ramanathan, he was in US and he had been working in industry of silicon, and so he came with the background of silicon devices and kick-started the solid state electronics group to develop what was at that time developing all over the United States, at that time silicon integrated circuits technology. And so this was the beginning, and then later on the group diversified into include physics and technology of non-crystalline semiconductors and compound semiconductors. So this is really the beginning of this activity. So this is a picture which I could get with great difficulty of K.V. Ramanathan. So he initiated the work on discrete silicon devices and bipolar integrated circuits. You see, transistors come in two varieties. The ones which got Nobel Prize by Bardeen and Shockley, they are called bipolar junction transistors, and then later version, which is the technology which is in the devices in computers and they are called MOS transistors or field effect transistors. So they were the two basic types of devices, and initial work was on bipolar transistors, and there were many members. Pinto is there in the audience here, and P.M. Musker, of course, is left. Some of you may recall Apte, who was backbone of this program, as Chandrasekhar. He worked on some aspects of research on this topic. D.K. Sharma is, of course, with us, and he is the chairman here. P.S. Subramanian, he was partly in the computer group and partly worked with solid state electronics group, and he designed many of the things which you will see his contributions. And Vengurlekar, he was a student in theoretical physics, and later, after finishing PhD, he joined us in solid state electronics. So the group established an integrated circuits lab. Early work was on design and fabrication of what is this TTSL. I told you two types of transistors, that bipolar junction transistors, that is the basis of this. And later the group established also the MOS based, which is the current lot on which most of the thing is based. So these I have called early pioneers. There are two persons you can identify who on whose shoulders the rest of the group developed. The second person who joined in 1967, 2 years later, was Guha, as Shubhendu Guha. And his early work was on some devices which are actually resistors, but at very high fields. These resistors produce microwaves. They have negative resistance. They're part of the band structure of this material. And so he started work. And when I joined, V.T. Karulkar was working with him, was used to make gun diodes, and they used to burn very quickly. And some of the early, my association with this, I did something with them, and the devices became more stable. But anyhow, by 1970, Guha was trained in Calcutta School, Radio Physics and Electronics, and so he was he was looking for new venues, and so he started two activities, partly based on this work, gun diodes, which were gallium arsenide instead of silicon. They used gallium arsenide that has the right band structure to do such things, and so I joined this activity, which was already begun and Subramanian and A.K. Srivastava, and Guha also had involved many students from different places in the country. So this is one activity which flourished, and I sort of continued to work in that area. The second activity which he actually began was the physics of amorphous semiconductor. Now, these are non-crystalline materials, and then people were beginning to look at what is the role of disorder in amorphous materials, and so the rules of the subject. So I've been in interaction with all these people whose I have taken them from their quotes. Rules of the subject were just being formulated, and Guha decided to start this activity. And members who contributed in this were Narasimhan, several of you know. Inakshi Bhattacharya was a student. Stanislav Petrushko came from Poland. He was a student. K.V. Krishna was a postdoc, and D.R. Papat was helping to formulate. You know, we had to make our own systems and everything, as of course many other people who have gone before me said we made our systems, and so we also made our systems. Now, this is one of the, if you ask me for landmark and something which you can call, which will live for a long time and everybody in the world will use, and this is that kind of result. This is a world leading result. There is some element of chance and good luck, which Ramanathan said. So in the late 70s, in the late 70s, there was a lot of interest in amorphous hydrogenated silicon for its potential industrial application. The material was usually made by decomposing 100% silent gas. Guha and colleagues in Narasimhan and Petrushko found the material deposited from 10% diluted hydrogen. This is SiH4. So it can be diluted in hydrogen, and they used this dilute hydrogen. And it turned out that this material has superior properties. Of course, they had to establish that fact, and this is the paper which there are not many publications which I am going to project, but this is this paper is referred by all people working in this area, and it is used over and over again all over the place to work to synthesize this material. Guha, of course, had fundamental physics as one of his goals. So he actually organized a conference in 1981, one of probably the earliest conferences in India to be organized in this way. And many of the, so I have a copy of this and I can give it to the archives, and it can be available for anybody to look at it. So this is one of the things which will happen time and again to people working in solid state electronics, and I will have some one or two comments later on to make on this aspect why people were leaving. Doesn't matter. So in 1982, Guha joined a company in US called Energy Conversion Devices, which was working on devices using hydrogenated amorphous silicon and particularly solar cells. And it was anticipated that material, solar cells made from this material will dominate the solar energy. It turned out that did not happen, but that did not was not very clear at that time. So later on, Guha became the president of United Solar, which is another offshoot of this, and which became the leading manufacturer of. You see, these days you hear about a lot about solar cells and solar cells of multi-junctions called tandem devices. They are the rule. They will rule in the future. As silicon, of course, ruling just now, but his hope that. So Guha was a pioneer in that region because of some requirements of this type of solar cells, and he also demonstrated the highest efficiency of solar cell and modules. So Guha became very, very well-known technocrat in US. In fact, I have seen pictures of him with President Bush and President Clinton. And so what I want to say is that this was somebody who really made a mark. So morphosilicon work in TIFR, of course, continued to be done beyond 1982 when Guha left. And this was pursued largely by Narasimhan, but not only Narasimhan, Dinesh, Srivastava, and several other people, Inakshi. Inakshi is, by the way, a faculty in IIT Madras. And so they all investigated. You see, this is an amorphous material and it has a lot of disorder. And it is of interest always to semiconductor scientists to look at electronic energy states, where they are in the band gap or mid gap, and so on and so forth. So that occupies a lot of our time. There can be optical techniques, there can be electrical techniques, and so there were many experiments which were set up, which involved photoconductivity, field effect, photothermal deflections. This is an optical spectroscopy, and there were many publications. Now let me take you back. What was happening during this time in the silicon? Silicon field, I introduced the main characters of that. And so the first major person I want you, he's present here in the audience. And so he joined very early, just after Ramanathan joined, and in 1965, you see, and Pinto is a master builder. He's a master builder in the sense that thin films was one of the areas which was supposed to be progressed. And so he designed these systems early on magnetron sputter system for high rate growth films, and also RF sputtering systems. And you will see that throughout his life, here IIT and now also, he is continuing to build on various things. Secondly, because the group was supposed to work on integrated circuits, so that integrated circuits required a laboratory which will be called clean room. So he built our first clean room in India, and believe it or not, when he left TIFR, he went to IIT and he built their clean room for what is known as the Center for Excellence in Nanoelectronics. So you see, he is a master builder. That's what I call him, master builder. So design, and so secondly, he set up the silicon device fabrication facility in second floor C block of TIFR, which included a clean room for device lithography and various other things. Based on this clean room, these ICs were being made in TIFR, and then I will show you some kind of this is now a private landmark, which was very important for TIFR at that time. This is the landmark. You see some picture which is maybe not so clean, but at least you see some images, which is an image of a bipolar transistor circuit which works as a NAND gate or something like that. I will not go into the details of it, but there was important thing of this slide is that these devices were built, designed in TIFR, and then a team consisting of Apte, Maiskar, Pisharudi, under guidance of Ramanathan, of course, they went to Bharat Electronics in 1972 and established this technology in the laboratories in that industry. So this was the earliest technology transfer, you can say, from TIFR in the area, which was supposed to be developed by this group. And there were many other things so this, according to Apte, this was first ever designed chips in India and first ever fabricated in India. So you see, TIFR was progressing along some directions. Which was expected to do and doing pretty well, I would say. Now, the second type of transistors were this field effect transistor called metal oxide semiconductor or silicon transistors, and these are the main players in that game. And Dinesh here, Apte, and P.S. Subramanian. I don't know, many people may know him. So these MOS field effect transistors were the basis on which the large scale, LSI means large scale, and later on VLSI, very large scale integrated circuits were taken up. Next level of involvement in IC revolution. MOS gate technology was developed. So this technology had to be, when devices had to be built and then tested and various aspects had to be done. And this development finished in 1979. So you can see that by 1979, TIFR has all the basic aspects of MOS technology. This was a very important date, fabricated in and large-scale integrated circuits were fabricated in the institute at that time. Apart from this, this required various background activities. For example, activities which Dinesh led the circuit design, and then graphics were led by P.S. Subramanian, and the technology was evolved by this. So this forms the trilogy, which was the basis of this. I want you to remember that this 1979 is very important, because later on I will tell you how TIFR connection with this development of technology which occurred in this very institute later on broke. TIFR role in this was not recognized in the ultimate establishment of semiconductor complex. Before I do that, so there were, of course, Dinesh Sharma was also very active. He had spent time in Cornell, which was So in any case, he was doing research with a topic, rule of heat removal and how heat generated, etc. And he was modeling these things. The electrothermal modeling, according to him, has now become the mainstream again these days. Dinesh also recalls that in addition, and this was recalled by Nagaran in the morning also, that in addition to computer-aided design, PS and he worked with Multani for developing an electronic calculator long before these became common items. Manu Multani, of course, went on to establish the nanomaterials activity in TIFR, leading the Indian research in this area. So this you can say is the earliest person who deviated from whatever he was doing as part of the solid state electronics activity. Dinesh also had left by 1992 or 91. So you can see one by one, several people who were involved in silicon particular activity, they had to leave. Though I will give you some reasons for that. But before doing that, TIFR was intimately involved not only in making these devices, but working on the background of materials and physics of those materials. And so one of these names is Chandrasekhar. Chandrasekhar, he was working towards his PhD. They're growing silicon on silicon dioxide. Next slide will show you that. And so there are parts of this circuits which involve P region, P-doped region, N-doped region, and oxide. All these things have to be, their properties had to be controlled and optimized. And then ultimately they made transistors, which were, so CMOS became the vehicle based on which all the rest of the industry grew. But all this was being experimented. So look at the dates, you know, it's 1980. So there were, so this silicon was being deposited on silicon dioxide and then by CVD, and then it was being crystallized. This is a very difficult problem to grow a crystalline material on top of an amorphous material like silicon dioxide. But this was done, and I will show you a minute in that, and devices were fabricated. Chandrasekhar also left TIFR to go to Bell Telephone Laboratories, where he became the leader of development, subsequently integrated optoelectronics for optical communication. So this is a picture which shows, this is as deposited silicon. You can see diffraction rings, which is polycrystalline, and then same has been crystallized here, and you can see the dots which belong to the crystalline material. And this is a device made MOS transistor, and this is the first time IV characteristics of such a device. The other person who led the research in silicon was Arvind. As I told already, he was doing PhD in high energy physics, I think so, in theoretical physics. And then he came to solid state electronics group, and he worked on this. This is a structure, by the way, that a MOS structure. So this is the metal, oxide, and semiconductor. So it looks very simple, but it has all its complexities, which were and there were some things which called reliability or instabilities of such devices, because the devices work at very high electric fields, and then so the electrons can go from metal to the insulator, and then they can change the threshold of transistors and various things which can happen. And he was studying that phenomena with his student Lakshmana. And the other thing is that so this is according to so when Gurulekar joined the group, so there was other things which were going on at the group, was large scale integration design, and then there were several other people who, some of them I don't remember now in the pictures, I could not get. And Subramanian was working on tools for making these circuits, layouts, and using some of these tools. Vengurlikar also made a circuit which was the NMOS static RAM LSI. So you see, it was a group which was not only working on materials, devices, but large scale integrated designs and then rendering them. TMS Murthy, he joined as a postdoc, I think from ISC he was a PhD, and then he was actually making these fabricating chips in the laboratory which was established by Pinto. So only this member joined semiconductor complex later on. There are some other things. TIFR was also spreading the culture of this technology which had got acquired, and so these people went to IIT Madras and then offered courses, and then several students were coming and doing projects in these things at TIFR, practical projects. And there was, of course, now these periods are much later periods, and the technology was, there were two from Opte. And so there was a project, UNIDO, UN project, where PI and Apte and Joshi, they went and established this technology there, and with 90% yield according to Opte's report. And then Opte also established bipolar transistor technology in 1988 at IIT Kharagpur. A.V. Joshi, who I mentioned here, was a very competent chemical engineer. In fact, he established a company. This is another factor which happened, that people from TIFR, they branched out and had their own companies, and he helped them, I think, this high energy physics detectors, and Mandal may know quite a bit about it. And the other thing is, Pinto started this. This is now in still in 70s, and so he spent some time in Alan Clark Research Center in UK, and then came back and they made charge coupled devices. And for developing that, there was, earlier I told you the gate was metal. Now for these requires high precision and silicon gate instead of metal gate, and that technology was developed. And at the same time, believe it or not, he also made in-house an ion implanter to shift the threshold of transistors, etc., etc. So you see, all these developments were occurring simultaneously, developing our instruments, etc. All of us were involved in how we hardly bought any instruments. We mostly developed them over here. Now, most of the people who worked on silicon, they shifted house. They shifted their nature of work because semiconductor complex got established. Although it was initially supposed to be an initiative from TIFR and political leaders of the country, but ultimately that didn't happen. That story I'll tell you at the end. But in the meantime, the members had started looking for other possibilities, and then this happened. High temperature superconductors were discovered in 1986, and TIFR also, there was a lot of excitement, and Pinto decided to work on thin films of these new materials. He had these sputtering systems. As I told you, he was a master builder, and he had several such RF sputtering. So he started with this, but he found that there was these were multi-element systems, so there was non-stoichiometry. And following a visit, which was attended, house, our AG16 was full. I also remember that day. And pulse laser deposition, Venkatesan said that it is very suitable for these multi-organic, multi-component films. And so Pinto shifted immediately to this technique. And then in this Pi helped him a lot, and Opte also started working on the microwave properties of these thin films, because it was supposed to be something which films were the applications of these high temperature superconductors. Now, as several people have remarked here, SP Pi went on to establish Excel Industry, known for excellence in design and fabrication of vacuum systems, supplying to labs all over India, and not only India, several people abroad. He also has supplied these pulse laser deposition systems elsewhere. This is another activity which is much later, but this was done simultaneously while Opte was working on other things, because we established an electron beam lithography on electron microscope we already had. And then so when I established this, then there were many. So this is a micro electromechanical systems, which is a sensors based, and Opte always had interest in sensors, and so he used this activity to design such systems in TIFR. Let me now go back. So I have covered large part of the silicon and related materials and activities. What is happening in the gallium arsenide? So gallium arsenide was started, as I said, in late 70s, late 70 or 71. I joined in 72, so some basic system already existed, which Guha had got fabricated. In 1974, Subramanian joined this activity in this group and started working on growth of epitaxial gallium arsenide films. And now there was lots of problems which I don't want to get into, but there was one particular thing, that the surface of the material substrate on which we were growing films used to get affected during the is a process which occurs at some 700 degrees centigrade. So some deterioration of the surface used to occur. So we decided that we will freshly etch it by a solution which is undersaturated, and then lo and behold, we made some publications on this, so that the nature of the liquid phase epitaxy growth became very nice and regular and shiny, and it's reverse quality. So we did make devices subsequently, but not only that, the activity expanded to include many materials, aluminum gallium arsenide, gallium antimonide, etc., etc. You can see there's a whole range of 3-5 compounds we could grow, and one of the students spent part of her PhD growing these aluminum gallium arsenide layers and studied the property. Raj Lakshmi also studied some of these materials. A student from Bombay University, Prakash Murala, also studied some of these. And Suresh, who has been here, who was my colleague, and we advanced these things. So now we could grow some materials in which we could make devices. So for doing that, you need many layers with different materials, etc., etc. And there was a board design which we chose, which was perfected in a laboratory in TIFR Institute in St. Petersburg, and I had connections with them, and so Suresh spent some time with them, and they also came, and our glass blowing shop made some very nice graphite boards in which we could go 6-layer, 7-layer devices, and we made ultimately high quality diode lasers. That story I will tell you. The other work which got started, which Subramanian participated, was so the defects, as I told you, defects play a big role in the semiconductors, and so it is the job of persons working with semiconductor device physics or semiconductor material science to investigate these defects. And something called main electron trap, this was investigated. It was suspected it may be due to oxygen, but later on we made materials with oxygen and various things. Subramanian studied these things, and that was the work he did. Then there was another defect called DX center. We'll not like to go into details of this, which so this is another interesting thing. This defect was discovered in gallium arsenide under applied pressure, but it occurred naturally also in aluminum gallium arsenide alloys as grown. And so both of these types of materials studies were done under pressure, etc., and something called deep level transient spectroscopy was also established. This group discovered, so when we were making so many things with alloys, we also discovered that the signatures which you get by those DLTs, they were broadened, and they were due to the alloy disorder. Something called alloy disorder is so these are crystalline materials, but nevertheless, because compositions have fluctuations, local fluctuations, and they give rise to changes in the signatures of the. And then also Narasimhan realized at some stage that we were measuring properties of these defects, which are energies and then cross sections for capturing the electrons or holes, and something called Mayer-Nelder rule applied to such things. So there were several people who contributed to. Vijay Singh, who was partly a postdoc theory physics, also participated in some of this. The other work which started early, and Guha had initiated that in 1977, was the work on junctions. Metal semiconductor junctions have played classically a role which is investigation of you have to make metal contacts to semiconductors, but metal semiconductor contacts are not necessarily only contacts, and so one has to study their physics. And so Atul Srivastava joined in 1979, and he carried out detailed investigations of current transport in metal semiconductor contacts, and subsequently he also applied it to some form of transistors, which were phototransistors, and people from Samir also participated. Another area in which I worked was, you see, insulators on semiconductors have always played a very important role. So we worked a little bit on that. And some work was also done with Kurup and R.P. Sharma on the ion implantation of such materials. Okay, so this is the break where we have now looked at what was started early on, And now there is going to be a break in the activities of persons, and optoelectronics would emerge. Okay, if it is 5 minutes, I will be very quick. So, so there are three different areas. I continued with optoelectronics of 3-5 compound. Optoelectronics meant lasers, work with optical spectroscopies and devices. And then there was work on organic semiconductors and ultra-fast optoelectronics. Fortunately, ultra-fast optoelectronics, some of it was covered by Ravindra. So this is a school which organized in 1989. It was organized with help. So it turned out that Atul, who is somewhere there, he went to US in Bell Labs, and then he became familiar with, and so many of the speakers for these schools came from this Bell Lab. Okay, so let's see, what do I want to do? So this is Atul, and Atul MOVP growth. So we acquired an MOVP growth system. So this is the first system. The rest of the things we used to build. So this was a system which we got it, and then he optimized the growth. Not only optimized the growth, and he made multi-layered structures, which included quantum realms, which I worked on for many, most of my students worked on. But he made lasers in 1993, and these are modes of cavity, longitudinal modes of the cavity, and then all this luminescence spectroscopy, etc., were established. And see some of the devices which we made, up to 1 watt diodes which we made, etc. We also made some quantum well based photo detectors which worked in the range of around 10 micron, etc. And porosilicon is, you see, silicon is not a good optoelectronic material, but there was this material called porosilicon, which was emitting red light. It was very strange phenomena, and Narasimhan looked at it, and Sonali looked at it, and they came to some conclusion that this is some emission due to some related to internal surfaces of porosilicon. This is a very important development which occurred in the institute. Much has been said about the collaborations, but this is between Narasimhan, who was working, of course, in solid-state electronics, and then Professor Pariswamy, who was in chemical sciences, and they combined hands to work on optoelectronics of the organic materials. And so there is a lot of students who worked with them. He was a synthesis chemist and he was a physicist, and so they combined and the students went from one lab to the other. It is very rare such things happen. And the ultra-fast optoelectronics was, of course, has been said earlier by Ravind Kumar, was led by Bengaluru, and work was on done by Prabhuji and Vipul Pal, Rajesh Kumar, and Achanta Gopal. And this involved ultra-fast optoelectronic process in semiconductor and plasmonics. And so this picture was earlier. This is a transistor picture, and this is a quantum laser picture. And what you're seeing is that the electrons are at very high energy, and how they relax. That is the process which is being, and here they are recombining electrons and holes, and how fast, etc., etc. Those are the things which you. So this is one of the pump probe experiments in which there are two beams. One is a pump beam, another beam which can be delayed with respect to the probe beam can be delayed with respect to the pump beam, and then you can measure the transmission, reflection, photoluminescence, wherever or whatever. It depends on the technique. And then so this ultra-fast pulses based exploration of semiconductor nanostructures and work on cosmonics and terahertz at TIFR remain unique in India even to date, and it has been commented upon others. And then you see this is a mixed state of electrons and photons called polaritons. And so that was so electrons move under electrical field, but they're slow. Whereas light is fast, but it's not controlled. But there are these species that are called resonances, which can be excited, and they can be used hopefully in futuristic. This is futuristic. Can you make contexts in which the delays are not by RC like time constants and things like that? And so my students, of course, they worked on spectroscopy of these quantum structures. Nagarajan showed a quantum Hall effect signature, which I will not, this is some laboratory which we had established. And so so the quantum Hall effect involves both birth states and edge states. And Viswajit, he was able to look at spectroscopy of electrons at the edge, as well as spectroscopy of the electrons in the bulk of these quantum Hall effect materials. So now I will require some 3-4 minutes. Yeah? What I want to say is that what is the story about this semiconductor complex? I think it's important to know this story. So in 1976, the government of India made a cabinet decision to establish semiconductor complex. Dr. Zarabi, he was a PhD from Institute of Science, Bangalore. He was the officer on special duty, and Professor K.V. Ramanathan was the project director. K.V. Ramanathan, which I already described. At that time, it was anticipated that semiconductor complex will come up in New Bombay. It was clear at this stage the future of integrated circuit was MOS devices. I already explained. Professor C.R. Viswanathan, he gave a set of very nice lecture, and many people from the country actually attended that. So there is Zarabi. He was actually managing director of this complex from 1993 to 2005. Dr. Zarabi was operating from the Air India building, which is located close to TIFR, and he had a lab, etc. And according to him, he was attending to work in Air India building in the mornings, and in the afternoons, he will have sessions at TIFR and discuss various aspects of what is this semiconductor complex going to be. Now, this is a quote which I quote from a report, which is from the so Ashok Parsarthi, he was the Electronics Commission Secretary in 70s and early 80s, and he has a paper called Building Capacity in Electronics Sector, which is shared by Dr. Zarabi with me. And this quote I'm giving you from there. An important aspect of setting up and launching SCL was the selection and appointment of Mr. Virendra Mohan as SCM, the chairman, managing director of SCL. This is Parsarthi. I got Mohan's summary biodata and took it to Mrs. Gandhi and convinced her that he was the right person for the job. Mohan took charge of SCL in May 1981. So this is how the TIFR, so all of us, in some sense, in the early 80s, we had a great uncertainty. It was sort of rumored in our group that solid state electronics is going to close, because most of the people will go to SCL. But it so happened afterwards that none of us actually went to SCL. In the context of our and eventuality, none of the persons except TUMS, he was postdoc from IFC, joined SCL. It is useful to consider a hypothetical question. What would have been the course of process? You see, you hear a lot about chips and this and that. We were working on these things at that time itself, right? And then if a whole group of very talented persons from TIFR, all working in various aspects of NMOS, PMOS, CMOS, process technology, VSS design, computer design. So SCL tried to recruit technical persons from abroad, but none came. It is my gut feeling that if the leadership of SCL had come to TIFR, the outcome could have been very different. Okay. So now there was subsequent participation. Dinesh kept on participating. He went on going to SCL and gave lectures on the design aspects. And so happened that many of the people he trained, they eventually left the SCL and rose to senior positions in international companies when these came to India. So you know the desire that several software companies have come to India, and where the people came from, Dinesh and his training. This is probably the last slide, and many people from all over the world have been involved physically, coming to TIFR, spending several. So Professor Gottfried, he used to come for 20 years. For every year, he spent 1 or 2 months. Currently, also he has collaborated with Prabhuji and Jagdeep Shah. Of course, you heard he was with Vengur later, and so K.S. Chandrasekhan, professor, he retired from Madurai Cambridge University, and his son was in Bombay, so he came and worked with us for nearly 10 years, etc. Prusken used to visit theory group, and once we invited him to our quantum hall result, and then he said, oh, he understands what we are getting, and then, so there was some papers like that. So there are many people you can see all over the country and various parts of the world who have contributed to various things. This is just a partial list. Future. Oh yes, this is the last slide. So TIFR continues to engage in areas of basic and applicable sciences. This applicable word should be taken properly, because at one time, as I told you, Institute of Fundamental Research, we were sort of, well, in some sense, in the beginning of 80s, we sort of were supposed to leave institute. So one should think how to evaluate people. That's a very big problem. And the nature of the work keeps on changing, but evaluation is important. And so what should be done about it? So state-of-the-art nanofabrication facility was established, that Ravindra Kumar said, and that was done by Arnab and Mandar Deshmukh. And so, and Achanta Gopal, and they make their nanostructures and devices, etc., for application. Arnab Bhattacharya, of course, has been. I'm sorry that I have not any more slides than this, but you have seen some of their work, and then more is required. They can tell you also in separate seminars. Nanowires he has been making, and nitrides of gallium and indium are mentioned by Ravindra Kumar. Sandeep Ghosh, of course, has advanced. The spectroscopy looks very grand lab now, as most sophisticated multidimensional subject and applied to study many materials as well. Prabhuji, of course, has been developed deep into various aspects of terahertz spectroscopy, generation, detection, application. And not only that, Prabhuji has been recently helping Pintoji in developing novel fuel cell structures for clean energy. You know, this is possible in TIFR, and people can talk to Pinto about it. Achanta Gopal, of course, made those photonic band gap structures, which are the basis of these new type of optical properties based on nanomaterials. And Mandar Deshmukh has delved deep into investigations of various types of nano devices, where he investigates electron and phonon transport in graphene and many heterojunctions, etc. And Vijay Raghavan, of course, he is doing excellent work, superconducting devices for quantum computing. Okay, thank you very much for attention.